Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is January 17th, 2019, and this is episode 121. Politicos is the BC Politics Podcast. Tell us what you think of the show by leaving us a review or get at us on social media. Most importantly, help us build the show by throwing us a couple bucks a month at patreon.com/politicos.
I'm Scott Lembum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. On today's show, Trudeau's getting a bunch of do-overs. Turns out he gets to pick a new candidate in Burnaby South, and he's redone his cabinet. And we're also going to look over across the pond at Britain again because they spent the last week careening closer and closer to the cliff. And there's been some other assorted news, including some stuff here in BC. First, as always, Politicos is in partnership with BC Today, British Columbia's daily newsletter dedicated exclusively to BC politics. Sign up for a free trial to have unique coverage of the BC legislature delivered to your inbox every morning. Listeners to Politicos enter the offer code CITIZEN for access to a special rate. For your free 2-week trial of the newsletter, go to britishcolumbiatoday.ca. Before we jump into today's show, I think I have a bit of a correction. Last week, we were talking about this Burnaby South by-election, and we mentioned the Conservative candidate, Jay Shin. I think I said he was Chinese-Canadian. I assumed that based on his surname and the fact his profile said he immigrated to Canada at a young age. With all of the kerfuffle this last week over race in Burnaby South, it was mentioned he's Korean-Canadian, so I apologize for that mistake, and I will try to actually do better in the future. I think that's a good point to launch into segment one, which I'm going to call No Take Backsies. Karen Wang is out as the Liberal candidate.
Yes. So earlier in the week, The Star published a scoop where it turns out that Karen Wang had been using WeChat, a Chinese language social media platform, to do a little campaign and did say a few things that, well, were questionably racist. Specifically, she highlighted the fact that she should win the election because it's a majority Chinese riding in terms of background of the people living there, and that Jagmeet Singh could not win because he is, quote, of Indian descent, or translated to English would be, quote, of Indian descent.
I don't know that she said, to be fair to her, that she said he couldn't win because of that, but she did point out
if all the Chinese voters voted for her, he would not win.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, he happens to be of Indian descent.
So on Wednesday, she issues this statement saying she's resigning that reads very much like a Liberal staffer probably wrote it, because that's probably what happened. So the Liberals announced she's not going to be their candidate, and there was some people are critical of the Liberals for taking too long on this. I guess it was 15 hours between the story breaking and her resignation.
Quick that's not a huge amount of time. It's not like they hummed and hawed for days on end about this.
Yeah, I found that a bit bizarre. But the other thing that came out is Michelle Rempel, I think it was, said, oh, she actually approached us to run for the Conservatives, and we said no. To which she later told other people, no, I told them no. All we know is she and the Conservatives talked about her running for them, and it didn't happen, and then she ran for the Liberals. But so today, this column comes out, I guess from the Toronto Sun and republished in the Vancouver Sun, because all Canadian newspapers are owned by Postmedia. Basically an exclusive saying she regrets her resignation, wants to take it back, and continue to run for the Liberals. Also, she's sorry, and she's really, really not racist.
Yeah, so turns out she's written this letter to the Prime Minister and a bunch of senior Liberals saying, please, let me keep running. I want to keep running. Oopsie on the WeChat thing, but, I've apologized. Let's just move forward. And this is just one minor detail that immediately jumped out to me. Is they republish it at the bottom of the Sun article, and her signature includes a heart emoji, which just seems odd for a letter to the Prime Minister. But, yeah, not really here or there.
It's Justin Trudeau. Maybe it's how he signs his letter.
Either way, the Liberals, I think within an hour or two, came out and said in no uncertain terms that, no, she's not going to be our candidate. It's just not happening. But there was this wonderful period of confusion this morning where nobody knew what was going on.
All we knew is that she was planning, because she told this to the Prime Minister in her letter for some reason, to hold a media conference at 1 p.m. this afternoon at Burnaby Public Library near Metrotown, which, fine, that's not unexpected for someone who feels like they have more to say, except the Burnaby Public Library, it turns out, had no notice that they were playing host to this event, nor did they permit partisan press conferences to occur on library property. Now, libraries have gotten in trouble for their booking policies in the past, but I think this is a fairly non-controversial one. In any case...
Basically because she didn't ask the library.
Yeah, in any case, at the very least, you should ask first. You don't just show up with a bunch of media. And so 1 o'clock turns around, she arrives, is greeted by a whole bunch of press, but also the chief librarian of Burnaby, who comes and tells her she cannot be on the property, she can't hold her press conference there, she has to leave. And so she goes across the street and
stands in the parking lot.
Porters huddle, against the sidewalk, and she gives her statement there. And in her statement, she reiterates that she's not racist, she's sorry for the comments, this is how the Chinese community talks to one another, which I can't comment on at all.
I have heard that on WeChat, campaigning does lean in to ethnicity a bit. The examples I've heard are more along the I'm Chinese, you should vote for me, or this person has been a friend of the Chinese community, you should vote for them. I haven't quite heard of by the way, this person's Indian, cough, cough.
In case you didn't get that with the last name Singh.
Yes.
Wang continued her press conference saying she hasn't decided yet if she will continue to run in this by-election. She can't run as a Liberal now, but she may run as an independent, which would be weird, but it would be allowed. It would add some more drama to this situation. The other thing I found really bizarre about this is her announcement and this letter she put out. She leaks it to one media, and I mentioned the Toronto Sun, but she didn't just go to the Toronto Sun. She went to Joe Warmington there, who the Beaverton has mocked by saying he has an anti-Islam column ready in his pocket for every, chance he can whip it out. And he's known as that kind of... He's not rebel.
Yeah.
But he would be welcome there.
Yeah. If you were a middle-of-the-road conservative who wanted to get your story out in a case like this, he's probably not the person you would go to. So for a Liberal or former Liberal candidate to do so is odd.
Yeah, I was talking with someone, it may have even been you earlier, and that this is kind of, if you were going to make a jump to the People's Party, this is the kind of approach you would take, except they already have a candidate lined up in Burnaby South.
Interestingly, the only candidate who's registered with Elections Canada
at this exact moment. It's not
fairly
uncommon.
Common, yeah. Common for the parties to get their stuff in, although interestingly, the NDP has nominated their candidates in the other two ridings, but haven't quite got the leaders' paperwork in yet.
Yeah,
which is
I guess
weird.
He's busy knocking on doors and answering questions poorly about China, which luckily this story has distracted from, but we can come back to that in a minute. So Wang's story, I think, isn't done yet. She's not currently running, but has made some new friends. And I guess the Warmington connection is his beat is hating Trudeau. And so is Brian Lilly's, who gives a video commentary on the article. But it's just bizarre, and everything in here is just a bit, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Oh, one other thing that we didn't mention that also came out today was that apparently the local riding association had voiced some concerns to the National Party about whether Karen Wayne would be a good candidate, and those were ignored too.
Yeah, and there was a column in the Burnaby Now also talking about when she ran for the BC Liberals and how she missed a couple election debates in the last provincial election, and she also refused to give media comments ever, except answered one survey by email. And so they were already starting to be a bit skeptical of her candidacy. And then I'm seeing a couple people both guess, and also I saw Charlie Smith actually say he has a cabinet member as a source, maybe, who are saying maybe the federal Liberals just want to throw this by-election because it's better for them if Singh is an elected ineffective leader than someone who gets booted by the party and replaced by someone better.
Yeah, Andrew Coyne's also been writing columns speculating along this. It's kind of now become one of the punditry assumptions that or theories that's being flown out there. I don't honestly like it could go either way. I forcing the NDP to do a leadership race. That'd be February. Call it like 8 months out from an election. 9 to 8 months out from an election to start that process up is one of those things that could be potentially damaging to the NDP because it's never a good sign when you have to bring in someone at the last minute.
But then they want to win the riding and Singh to lose.
Yeah. So the other theory is that Singh will flop hard in a national campaign, so it's better to have him around than to potentially get someone who's good at being leader in. Like it's
like Tom Mulcair because of that absurd rumor of his reemergence as like a national commentator. And
yeah, so this kind of, I mean, there's been a bring back Mulcair campaign going in the background for like a few people on Facebook or whatever, but this idea I think got kicked off in earnest after a interview that Jagmeet Singh flubbed rather badly earlier in this week on Saturday, I believe, where he didn't know a major development in the ongoing tensions between Canada and the US, between Canada and China, specifically where the Chinese ambassador had suggested that Canada's objection to China arbitrarily detaining our citizens had something to do with white supremacy rather than flagrant disregard for rules of law. It was an insane thing for someone to say, and it was a major development in the ongoing major foreign affairs file. So it looked really bad when the leader of a major party had no idea this was going on.
The defense the NDP tried to put up was Singh got caught off guard by a kind of rambly preamble that ended with...
Was not that rambly.
What is your position on all that? But it was more direct when you actually watch it.
The response was, who said what now?
Yeah. Who accused who of white supremacy?
That's I think actually the line. But it's not good anyway, and Singh took a lot of heat, and honestly, if this Karen Wang thing hadn't blown up, this is probably what we would have led off the by-election section with. But anyway, afterwards, in the same program, they did one of these, get 5 people on to have a bunch of talking heads, and Tom Mulcair was one of them, and, I can't recall exactly what he said, but basically, yeah, it's bad when the leaders don't know these things, and people took that to be this is Tom Mulcair, twisting the knife a bit, and, maybe, but, like, because that's a fair comment, like, it is bad not to know these things, but that spawned a whole bunch of, well, if he's twisting the knife, is he planning a comeback? If Jagmeet falls here, now the NDP is a few months out from an election, and they don't have a leader. Oh, maybe we should bring back the other guy who was like a good parliamentarian and whatnot. And like the base, or some of the NDP base, I think, don't really like him because he underperformed expectations. But like he did a decent job, and it wasn't as good as 2011, but no NDP election has been as good as 2011. And like he had a respectable show. Like it's not a completely crazy thing to think that Tom Mulcair led NDP would probably be doing better than the current NDP is.
My feelings on Mulcair are long and complicated. I feel he's had his shot. If he had done anything after the 2015 election, other than just kind of wait to be booted from the party.
Yeah, like that's actually where I think he felt. Like the mistakes in the campaign, and there were several, are all things that were fixable. Like,
Stop smiling.
And be that attack dog that everybody liked Mulcair to be. Anyway, like those are fixable things that, with another couple of years under his belt and, having done one, like those should be fixed. And, you should go into a new election, stronger, better prepared. But yeah, the after thing where he just kind of sat around wide-eyed for like 3 months before they booted him. Yeah, that's kind of, I think, did more damage than not winning an election. He probably wasn't going to win anyway.
But I expect he doesn't want the job anyway, or else he'd have kept his seat in Outremont, because having resigned, and not just waited out the next election to resign, but actually left Parliament, suggests he's not interested. But the NDP does have a little bit of better news. Sven Robinson announced that he is going to be seeking the nomination for Burnaby North Seymour with the hope of unseating Liberal first-term MP Terry Beach. It's a good riding for Robinson to choose since he's from Burnaby originally and he's held those seats before. At the same time, it's not the most orange riding in Burnaby, where many are. But it'll be interesting to watch that. Robinson was very popular, I think, in his time until his ill-fated end with the stolen ring that he later explained due to bipolar disorder, and he sort of did his penance, I guess, spending time in Switzerland working for HIV/AIDS charities. And it'll be, interesting to see where that goes. And I guess the other news for the NDP is they have some cash in the bank now, as they took out a $12 million mortgage on the Jack Layton building.
Yeah, that's not good, but I mean, I guess there's something a little poetic about the fact that all of these years later, the NDP is still kind of banking on Jack Layton. But yeah, it's in some financial troubles, and they haven't had a great year fundraising.
Yeah, the party's been way back since 2015 in fundraising. Part of that was the leadership race, and then just sort of struggling since then. I was reading that this is the first time they've ever put a mortgage out on that building. They bought it with cash, I guess. It was only $3.5 million back then, so it was a good investment in the day. But yeah, mortgaging your assets when you don't have a clear cash, income stream, right? They're reliant entirely on donations. So hopefully this doesn't screw them, because it sounds like if they can't pay their mortgage, the bank is going to collect the rent of the other tenants who are in the building, which starts a really bad cycle. But they do need to pay for an election somehow, or at least get some money in the bank so that they can ramp up fundraising in advance of the election. But yeah, I don't think it's the worst news, but it's not a positive sign. And at least someone's thinking of ways to put cash in the bank. Yeah.
Especially when there's is Jade Meat saying a disappointment as leader question that's been on a lot of people's minds lately. So this is kind of, just another straw on that camel's back.
Well, just to close off talk of this by-election, the candidates have until, I think, February 4th, if I did the math right, to register. That's 21 days before the election, but they have to get it in by 2 p.m. So if you are thinking of running in Burnaby South, do that. And the other good news for anyone considering voting in that election is the Supreme Court of Canada ruled every expat has the right to vote indefinitely in Canadian elections. Now, I think you're only able to vote in the last riding you lived in. So if you are a former Burnaby South resident who now lives in Guatemala, make sure you're registered with Elections Canada and figure out how you can submit your special ballot. And maybe we'll do a bigger feature on that Supreme Court ruling in the future. But yeah, I guess the basic rundown of the Supreme Court ruling was a couple Americans who wanted to fight a Harper-era law that restricted expat voting to those who'd lived out of the country for 5 years.
Although I believe the original law goes back to the 90s with Trichin, and there's some modifications to it.
And so they challenged these laws. Supreme Court struck them all down. But I think Trudeau had already repealed those restrictions anyway. So it was
in the process, maybe?
Or yeah.
Because I think there has to be actually a live case, if the law change that gets muted out, Supreme Court doesn't take those, so.
Yeah. But I guess it's good news for anyone who's hoping to vote overseas.
Moving on to our second segment, it's not a demotion. This past Monday, the federal government did a cabinet shuffle. This was kicked off by Scott Brysing's announcement that he was leaving Treasury Board and was not going to be seeking re-election. And that prompted a shuffle to fill his spot and also do a little house clearing. So the major news out of this is that we have a new justice minister, because Jody Wilson-Raybould got moved from the prominent justice minister position to Veterans Affairs, which has been widely regarded as a demotion.
She says that I can think of no world in which I would consider working for our veterans in Canada as a demotion.
This was Trudeau's line as well.
But it's one of those situations where if you're playing defense, you're already losing.
Also, all the ministers are kind of even, but some portfolios are more notable and have larger responsibilities, but in terms of the public eye and kind of the broader policy context and what they're responsible for. So,
and considering the second half of her new title after Minister of Veterans Affairs is and Associate Minister of National Defense, even that sort of implies it's a subservient portfolio.
Yeah, and let's be honest, people pay a lot more attention to justice than Veterans Affairs.
I mean, there are specific people, notably veterans, who will care a lot about who is the Veterans Affairs Minister, but that is a smaller number than the number of people who will care about Justice Minister. So Wilson-Raybould gets demoted. Into her shoes comes David Lametti, the MP for LaSalle-Aymard-Verdun in Quebec. He's the former parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Innovation. And
that's actually quite a big... Yeah, not many people know, and that's quite a big jump because in the cabinet order ranking, justice is pretty high up there. So going from not even in cabinet and being a parliamentary secretary up to justice minister is quite the promotion.
Yeah, he's a former law professor. He helped found the Center for Intellectual Property Policy at McGill. I found one other story that was talking about him, and he was one of the, I think, only 4 Liberal MPs who didn't vote for Bill C-14, the assisted dying legislation, because he thought it was too restrictive and therefore violated people's constitutional rights, their charter rights, and the Carter case.
That's interesting, especially because
Wilson-Raybould was largely responsible for the language
and
that people are pissed at.
Yeah, and was fairly widely regarded as having issues with some of the bills she put forward, both in terms of when they got put forward. They took a lot longer than was expected to be brought to the House. And in addition to that, there's been quite a bit of criticism about whether or not some of her bills are constitutional.
Well, it's the party of the charter, and in Bill C-51 that just passed, the new one, not the old one that everyone hated, except Etienne over at Boys in Short Pants, who has a framed and signed copy on his wall. The new Bill C-51 actually requires all future legislation to include a charter statement, ensuring that all our future laws will be charter compliant, because all you have to do is say they are. So he'll be interesting to see what he does as Justice Minister and Attorney General. But with Wilson-Raybould going to Veterans Affairs, that means Seamus O'Regan needs a new job, and he moves to the Minister of Indigenous Services. This is one of the 2 portfolios that Trudeau split apart from the old Indian Affairs portfolio, and there's the service side and there's the reconciliation nation to nation minister. I don't remember what the other one's called, but this is another tough ministry since you're dealing with a lot of deep systemic issues and often not given enough funding to actually solve problems. And I don't know if I think Veterans to Indigenous Services is maybe a lateral to slight improvement move.
It's hard to say, but both of those are files that are difficult, under-resourced, and it's hard to come out looking good when you have to handle either of them.
So good luck, O'Regan. With him going into Indigenous Services, that means Jane Philpott has to move, and so she goes to President of the Treasury Board, Scott Bryson's vacant position now, and she gets the added role of Minister of Digital Government.
The Ministry of Fits and Phoenix.
And dealing with Facebook.
Yeah, she's very well regarded and kind of seen as one of those ministers you put when you need to get stuff done. So this is an interesting move and kind of a signal of where Trudeau's looking with this next election coming up. And I think locking down some of the spending issues is maybe a sign of what he wants to get done leading up to the next election.
Yeah, Treasury Board's a pretty prominent role. I mean, someone has to figure out how Canada spends all its money, and she's now in charge of the purse strings. So that's the major sort of 4-way card shuffle, with one being added. The only other big announcement was Bernadette Jordan, the MP for South Shore St. Margaret's in Nova Scotia, goes from being the former parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Democratic Institutions to being what I think is a new ministry, the Minister of Rural Economic Development. I think this is a signal from the Trudeau government that they're going to try to look at rural Canada more and not just be the urban elite party.
I mean, good luck with that. Well, I guess they have a very red Maritimes right now that they're trying to hold on to. So, yeah, I could see that.
So she's specifically tasked with the creation of a rural development strategy to spur economic growth and create good middle-class jobs in rural Canada, and also has to bring high-speed internet to more rural communities, work with municipalities to improve infrastructure of rural communities, and that kind of fun stuff. So rural internet is still terrible in this country, and the efforts we've made to expand broadband access have more often been lowering what our required standards are rather than pushing telecoms to like invest it all, because we live in a terrible, it's not a monopolistic system, it's the oligopolist when you only have like 3 main providers. So good luck.
So we just have like
Bernadette
really
Jordan.
terrible geography for trying to get broadband outside of the cities. Like it's a combination
It's
of the
difficult,
telecom
but it's not
sucking with it.
impossible.
Yes.
So with this, Trudeau's largely positioning himself for the upcoming election. He's sticking with Bill Morneau in finance, it looks like, and a lot of others, I guess. So yeah, small shuffle gets some of the more controversial people, namely Jody Wilson-Raybould, out of the limelight. It does mean Vancouver has slightly less prominence. Wilson-Raybould representing Vancouver-Granville was one of those 3-way races that people didn't actually know what was going to happen in 2015. Even the strategic voting people were telling people to vote NDP, and then that was a mistake.
Yeah, she actually won by a decent margin, but it's one of those that could definitely flip back.
Does any of this make a difference for the election?
I mean, having a slightly less prominent person holding one of the central Vancouver battleground riding, it could be a bit, but she also won it when she wasn't a cabinet minister, so like it might do a little bit. Like it does, as we were talking about earlier, kind of hint at a few signals on where the Liberals are going, but overall, it doesn't seem like this will have that much of an effect on the election. But this does mean I get to check off one of my first prediction from our year-end episode where I did call a cabinet shuffle.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. It also checks off the Oppo Christmas wish list, where I think Justin Ling was desperately pleading for Jody Wilson-Raybould to have new employment. Not necessarily out of Ottawa, but at least not as justice minister, following Ling's bemoaning of the bungled attempt at justice reform in this country. And so we'll have to see if Lametti can step up where Wilson-Raybould struggled. Well, and for a third segment, let's talk about a non-confident Brexit. This was a fascinating week in UK politics. The first big fun event was on Tuesday when Theresa May's Brexit deal went to a vote in the House of Commons. And I think when we last checked in on our British friends, we were talking about the deal she'd struck that no one liked, and that turned out to be very true.
Yes, this is, the last time a British Prime Minister came back from Europe with a deal this worthless, it was Neville Chamberlain.
Oh, I thought you were going to say like one of the Normans or something like that, or get into your monarchy history.
I think Chamberlain's was worse, but this was not a great deal in terms of the having people like it and being able to do anything with it.
So she puts it up to the vote, and the social media was fascinating to watch around this, and then the live stream. First off, John Bercow, the Speaker of the House of Commons in the UK, is amazing. He had this awesome rainbow, not like bright rainbow, but like subtle rainbow tie. He's able to just like yell at politicians in a mercurial manner and get everyone's attention. Perfect delight. Also, they have a slightly different tradition in the UK where the Speaker is actually allowed to name MPs when he's calling upon them to speak. Because watching that, it felt very weird because he wasn't just naming everyone's constituency.
Like, Jeremy Corbyn, your turn, or like something like that. Yeah, which actually, now that I think about when that guy grabbed the mace, you actually made a point of saying, I name you, which I guess, in retrospect, now I get why he said that, because otherwise he could have just used the guy's name.
Yeah.
Needs to separate that.
So this comes in for the vote, and there's people covering it. One Labour MP points out that she's in a wheelchair. She's like 8.5, 9 months pregnant. And actually her doctors had told her that she needs a cesarean section to deliver her baby because of medical reasons. And it should be that day. But she said, no, I have to go vote. And so she's in Parliament voting when ideally she shouldn't have to be, which raises all kinds of questions about, like, can we do a vote for vote thing? Can we, like, get proxy votes in Parliament at some point for at least emergency situations? That's a separate debate.
Anyway, it turns out the margin was big enough. It wasn't really an issue.
It was a symbolic margin, though. Ultimately, 423 members voted against this deal to 202 who voted for it. There were 3 Labour MPs who voted for it, and just a whole bunch of Conservatives, both on the "this isn't Brexity enough" and on the "this is too Brexity" sides, who joined with Labour. And I saw lots of people say this was one of the biggest defeats for a government in a century, because there were some big defeats, I guess, in the 1920s. But BBC was reporting it as the biggest defeat for a government bill in the history of the UK Parliament. Possibly just because there are more MPs now than there were like 100 years ago. But it's bad to have your government bill when you have almost a majority. You have a working majority with your confidence and supply agreement. This would be like John Horgan bringing forward a bill and it going down 60 to 25 because half his caucus split off and joined the BC Liberals to vote it down. So that was embarrassing for her.
Yeah, this deal is as dead as it can be at this point.
So she sets out in her speech after the vote that there's a couple steps forward. First, she's going to give the leader of the opposition a chance to table a motion of non-confidence, and we'll debate that the next day, which was Wednesday. And if that passes, they'll go to an election and go from there. If it doesn't, she'll talk with people, figure out what kind of deal will get past Parliament somehow, and then take that to the EU and get all that dealt with.
The EU, who's been very clear that this is as good as you're going to get.
And then get all that agreed by Parliament before their March deadline. So they have their vote of non-confidence yesterday, which everyone votes on party lines. I mean, Sinn Féin sat it out because they refused to take the oath to the Queen, but otherwise the Tories all vote for the government to stay, the DUP votes for the government to stay, and all the rest of the opposition votes against the government. And so the ultimate total was 325 to 306, and May lives to fight another day, which is almost too bad for her at this point.
Yeah, Brexit is such a shit show now. Like, I honestly don't know if that's good or bad news for the UK. Like, it's all the directions seem bad.
So all the opposition are asking May to, like, let's bring the temperature down a little. Let's Corbyn's specific demand before he starts making serious negotiations with Theresa May is for her to take with the no deal Brexit off the table. Like, let's all agree that's bad. And she doesn't want to do that because I don't know.
Well, I think without this very bad thing, it's weakens her bargaining position.
Everyone's out for themselves in this. She has also suggested she can't take Article 50 off the table. She can't revoke it. That is to delay Brexit because it would, quote, overturn the referendum result.
That's the non-legally binding referendum, right?
Yes, we looked this up on the Wikipedia page just to double check everything, and it highlights multiple times that the referendum was not binding. It didn't actually even enable the government to invoke Article 50. Theresa May had to pass a special bill to do that, which I'm sure if they brought forward a bill that said the Article 50 pause button bill, they could give the government the power to revoke it because they could get the votes. Like, they almost could. I'm not going to say they can get unanimous because there are some very, like, I want to say fringe, but they don't
have that for.
There's quite a few of them in the Tory party, Conservative Party, who are ready to run for a no-deal Brexit. But aside from those 20 to 100 people, there are hundreds of MPs who don't want the worst to happen. So there's a path there that no one seems to want to take.
There's also the path of, well, this has been a giant cock-up. Let's just call the whole thing off. Like, it's entirely within their power to do. The EU has said, yeah, if you want to cancel the Article 50 thing, we'll be fine with that. No harm, no foul. You know, it's the only thing that's stopping them is they don't want a bunch of angry voters. But, like, at the same time, you know, Britain's a representative democracy, and what's the point of a representative democracy if the representatives whose sole job, essentially, is to be the people who get to think about this stuff full time and make decisions on it, can't stop such an obvious disaster from happening.
I think this is why you don't do referendums in representative democracies, if you're going to make that argument. Since they've done it, it's hard to, it's legally possible to undo it. But politically, I think this is why the focus of most of the opposition now is on the people's vote. Let's do this again. Let's have a new referendum. Maybe it can be on deal, no deal, stay, and, have different options. Do something. But it kind of has to go back to the people since they put it there. And Corbyn's not totally sold on this, but he's, I think, amenable. The rest of the opposition, the Scottish National Party, the Greens, Lib Dems, are putting most of their eggs in that basket. May doesn't want another referendum because that just further weakens her position, since it's chaotic and expensive, and who knows what happens there.
You know what else that describes? A no-deal Brexit.
Well, that's much worse. She's also tied to the DUP, who are lunatics. So she's currently trying to meet with her cabinet, all these party leaders, and doing what she said she would do to see if literally anything could get through this parliament. But I can't imagine, honestly, the deal she probably put together was close. I think there are still some outstanding issues around this Irish backstop.
Well, the thing is, there are some fundamentally unreconcilable problems with Brexit. And, that deal was basically as close as you can get to an optimum agreement from the sense of trying to balance all of those competing problems. And it was a kind of shit deal that nobody liked. There does not seem to be a path forward here that leads to a better deal.
Yeah, you have people who hate the EU so much that they won't accept anything that's really short of, not a no deal, but we want all our laws back, whatever that means. And the opposite end of, we have to stay in the EU, any deal is a bad deal. And that's not even bringing the, left-right spectrum. So you have the, left's approach of Jeremy Corbyn sort of prefers Brexit, but wants it in a way that can make the UK more socialist. But then you also have leftists who figure the EU is not the thing that's preventing socialism from coming to the UK. If anything, it's the UK that's preventing socialism from coming to the UK. It's a mess. There's too many irreconcilable differences, and I guess this gives us a few more weeks of chaos in Britain as May tries to figure out what deal to do while refusing to budge on literally anything.
And honestly, the way this is looking, it's going to be a lot more weeks of chaos afterwards.
So yeah, not planning a trip back to the UK anytime soon.
Moving on to quick takes, the speculation tax is back in the news as the government has released the implementation details, and like the Vancouver Empty Homes tax, it's going to require people to make a declaration about their property and declare whether or not they have to pay the tax, and that has gotten a whole lot of people angry.
Yeah, so the announcement, which annoyingly, I guess, for the NDP, came out in the middle of their Nanaimo by-election, and that was probably because they needed to start sending these letters out, but also timing-wise, when you're government, you probably don't want to be sending letters about taxes to the people you're asking to vote for your candidate.
Yeah, although the speculation tax, every poll that's looked at it shows it's wildly popular. If the ballot question is speculation tax, yes or no, the NDP would win with 70%.
But let's just be clear on what letters people are going to be getting. So everyone who owns a home or property will get a letter from the government that says, you are going to pay the speculation tax. If you think this is a mistake, let us know. So it's now become an automatic presumption that everyone is a speculator, with then a requirement that you declare, oh, actually, it's not. And that's where I think at least the media cycle has been spending a lot of focus, because this inevitably will mean some people will miss the notification, not understand it, file it wrong, and get hit by this. Now, they'll have the ability to claim their money back for, I think, 6 years, I heard, but that presumptive tax might be a bit offensive to some voters, even ones who support a speculation tax, but go, why are you doing it in this way? On the other hand, I don't know what other way you do it. Maybe because I'm not creative, or I'm not a tax economist.
Well, I suppose you could mail them out with the, are you a speculator, check here to be taxed. But, I imagine the compliance rate would be significantly lower.
It is also probably going to be a little bit expensive. They have to send letters to 1.6 million people. And one of the estimates that actually comes from the ministry, and this is in a Von Palmer piece, is that only 32,000 homeowners are actually expected to be hit by the tax. So you're aiming for about 2% of the people out there to figure out who they are and tax them. Now, the Vancouver empty homes tax is a great model, as you mentioned, because when Vancouver sent out its notices to all of the property owners in the city to find out who's using their property or not, they did get a 99% response rate in the end, and that helps generate the data of who is maintaining an empty property or has it occupied.
Yeah, and in Vancouver's case, I think 8,500-ish, and that includes all the people who were in the midst of, renovations, redevelopments, all of that stuff. So yeah, it can actually also lead to some decent data.
Yeah, and that's one thing a lot of tax economists has talked up, is this is an important way to find out what is even happening. So at least that will be interesting. The letters are going out from January 18th to February 28th. People will have to complete their declaration, which can be done online by March 31st. And the government says it will only take 10 to 20 minutes. But if your property is co-owned, as in husband and wife or whatever other partnership you might have, both spouses or both title holders will have to complete the declaration. So there might be some people missed because of that. Hopefully it's all clear. Tax assessments will go out on April 1st, and I guess we'll know fairly quickly in the next few months how much property is to be taxed. But this has all raised a lot of ire for the BC Liberals, who say this is, a terrible tax, a bungled rollout. Nobody wants this. It's so cruel. Is that criticism going to hit any mark?
I don't think so.
Is that criticism going to hit any marks of people who would otherwise not vote BC Liberal?
Well, I mean, you'll probably get your Mike Harcourts and a few people like that who are definitely not BC Liberals, but have been critical of this current government's taxes. But overall, I don't think it's going to make a huge amount of difference. Like I said at the start, this is a popular tax, and you can complain a bit about the edges, but if targeting speculators is one of those things that generally polls quite well and people like, I mean, there's a certain amount of that I think people overestimate how many of the speculators aren't British Columbians, and that there's a fair bit of local speculation, and the, foreign speculator boogeyman's often overblown, which when these actually start to hit, you might actually see a bit more pushback from the, you weren't talking about us, were you? But, even that's going to be fairly small, and it's not enough. The percentage of British Columbians that own a second home is small enough that's not going to move a needle on anything.
Well, one thing the BC NDP is hoping to move the needle on and really play to their base in a slightly different way is with a announcement about forestry that John Horgan made at the Truck Loggers Association conference and trade show that's happening right now. He announced some changes to BC's forestry policy. There is a new Coast Forest Sector Revitalization Initiative with 5 broad goals that can basically be summarized as process raw logs in BC, reduce waste, support First Nations, which are kind of standard NDP talking points when it comes to the forestry sector.
Pretty much. The raw logs thing's one of those, not holy grail might not be quite the right word, but it's one of those articles of faith among the NDP when it comes to the forestry sector.
It's up there with building new refineries, and
which is a terrible idea. If there was a case to build a refinery in Canada, we would do so. Has anybody ever accused the oil sector of not being good at making money? If they could make money...
Oh, they rely on government subsidies and bailouts all the time.
Oh, they did a bunch of that, but they also make a lot of money. If there was money to be made refining in Canada, they would. And it's kind of the same thing with logs. There's no reason economically speaking why any given point on the processing of materials is the optimum place to be. And this desire that we be at, a different point than the economy naturally wants to put us, there's no real economic reason to do it.
Well, having jobs here is a better vote scheme than...
Oh, it's politically popular, but economically speaking, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to necessarily be a country that does value add in one particular sector rather than doing, say, raw materials in that sector.
Well, it's a carrot and stick approach that the NDP is going to take to see if we can change that calculation, though, for at least industry. I'm going to be honest, I don't know a ton about the forestry sector.
I learned basically all of it reading up on this today. Apparently we require that logs first try to be sold in Canada, and only then do we allow them for export, which basically just creates a discount for our logs in Canada and increases the cost of any exports. So we basically artificially make our exports more expensive, which isn't great if you're trying to be an export, because you want people to buy our stuff, and making Canadian wood artificially expensive is not good.
Well, we also have a number of export fees that do it very explicitly, and it looks like we'll be raising some of those as of June 1st. The government will also be rolling out a number of new bills, regulatory and policy changes over the next 2 years. They've announced a bill that's going to come, I think, in this first session. So I think we had Adam Olsen on to talk about salmon. We'll probably need to get someone, the Adam Olsen of trees, perhaps. Even if they have a similarly biased point of view, at least it can be an interesting conversation to talk about trees.
Yeah, I think we can try and find someone.
And if you know anyone, suggest it. But I think one of the other goals that they talk about, reducing wood waste, is probably one of those ones that it's hard to disagree with. Apparently a big chunk of the processing that happens when we're cutting down trees and shipping them overseas, or processing them here even, is dumping production waste stuff into rivers and waterways, and otherwise not getting the full value out of the tree. So if we can reduce that, it's probably good. Doesn't seem like a loser.
No, doesn't. I'd be curious to find out why there's so much wood waste, and apparently it's jumped quite a bit in the last decade or so. But
well, I imagine you don't want the branches.
Pardon?
I imagine you don't want the branches of the trees when you
probably
cut them
not,
down.
but they can be processed and other stuff. And the house I grew up in had a wood pellet stove where they'd take basically sawdust, make little pellets, and you'd burn them. So there's processes where you can presumably make money taking wood waste and turn it into something sellable.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to continuing to debate BC wood.
Well, jumping from one part of the resource sector to another, pipelines are, as always, in the news. This week, a collection of First Nations announced they were interested in the Trans Mountain project as a potential owner of it. So this is the 134 nations that are part of the Indian Resource Council. So they'd be looking to acquire the Trans Mountain project from the federal government that, as everyone remembers, bought it on our behalf.
The group, which I'm just looking at their website, they have been around since 1987, representing oil and gas producing First Nations. They've just generally been trying to represent First Nations who are, I think, interested in resource development and self-sufficiency that way. I think that's all good and fine and interesting. What was amusing was already I saw one, I think it was Global News piece, where they talked to a consultant who was like, I'm just going to give some free advice. Maybe wait for the pipeline to be built before you sign a check. And he wasn't trying to do it patronizingly, but just
it could be a boondoggle of a project.
As everyone pointed out when the federal government bought it. And so I'm sure they're smart enough and have some good counsel of their own to suggest similar advices. They're looking at, I guess, a couple different ownership models, and there'd be ways to benefit share between them.
Yeah, I think I saw one that had a very slight majority stake, or it might be minority. It was around the 50, 49 or 51%. I can't recall off the top of my head, but not take on all the risk.
At the same time, though, the Squamish Nation here in Vancouver is still adamantly opposed to the pipeline going through their territory, or if it does increase its capacity here, they want to make sure they have a final say over it, because even if these nations represent the other 99% of the path, which I don't know if that's true. This 1%, they still need proper consent, so we'll see how that works out with the consultations the government is ongoing. But it is interesting to see. I think this is the first serious bid that's been talked about for buying the pipeline off the government's hands.
Yeah, this had been rumored for a while, or that there'd been taught that there were First Nations groups interested in it. But yeah, this sounds like a more serious approach towards it than just those rumors. And it will be interesting because it will definitely change the political narratives around it.
Well, and the other thing trying to change those political narratives, it turns out, has been the Alberta government, which, as I think we've known for a while, has been running ads to try to promote the Trans Mountain Pipeline and questioning why BC is so hell-bent on destroying Alberta. But we know exactly how much they want to say about that, because the Tyee was filing some requests with the Alberta government to find out how much money they've been spending. And it turns out the Alberta government has now spent over $23 million on ads targeting British Columbians and elsewhere in Canada to promote the pipeline. And I guess in terms of government ad buys, that's not the largest.
Yeah, I've seen some of these ads come across my Twitter feed every now and then. One that was what Canada loses for apparently all the lost revenue we're not getting from the pipeline. And there's been a few of those that I've seen. That wasn't the only one, but they are fairly frequent.
To put that $13 million in perspective, the sponsorship scandal that kind of pretty much brought down the Chrétien government was basically found to have spent $2 million inappropriately and maybe a handful of money elsewhere. I'm not saying this is a sponsorship scandal because Alberta's not trying to buy BC's votes on anything and isn't doing it unjustly, but the scale of this spending versus what was one of like the most infamous kind of scandals in Canadian political... I mean, it's also like 15, 20 years,
yeah,
so there would be some inflation,
yeah.
But it's an order of magnitude more money that Alberta, one province, has spent than one federal government spent to keep Quebec in Canada, if that's the reason you see it. Or to just buy a bunch of votes for the Liberals.
There's definitely that.
But anyway, $23 million to see a bunch of ads telling you that BC has been attacking Canada and it's just unfair, and won't anyone please think of poor pitiful Alberta. And I guess the flip side is maybe that's working. Angus Reid had another poll out where they suggest a growing number of Canadians are seeing the, quote, lack of new oil pipeline capacity as a crisis. It's now 58% nationwide, as opposed to 42% who say it doesn't. Alberta, it's 87% of people think there's a crisis because we don't have enough pipelines, versus like Quebec, where 60% of people don't think there's a crisis. Here in BC, it's kind of tied down the middle. 53% say there's a crisis and 47% don't. Nowhere in this survey, as far as I know, is crisis defined.
Probably not, but crisis is fairly strong language. If I was a moderate pipeline support, I'm not sure I'd go as far as to say it's a crisis we don't have it.
I think most interesting thing in here is the age splits, which I don't have in front of me, but I pulled from CBC. It talks about how the 18 to 34-year-old demographic was not supportive of pipelines versus the 55 plus were the most supportive and labeled pipelines capacity a crisis, which if you want to go very crude and just go, the people who have the longest to live with the continued burning of fossil fuels are the most pessimistic about the continued burning of fossil fuels, where the oldest, who are like, fuck it, get the oil out of the ground, sell it and make a bunch of money, I only got a few years anyway, are pro-pipeline. But that'd be the pessimistic take on that. That strong number for Alberta also highlights how monolithic the culture is there. Like, just being back for a few days over Christmas, the dialogue there, crisis is the word they would use. And so it doesn't surprise me that it's like that, but it's a different place to visit.
I think the main thing in here that's interesting is just how high the numbers are who say it's a crisis. Especially in BC, where I think perception is that BC is very anti-pipeline, and definitely our Vancouver bubble is very anti-pipeline. That's one of the reasons I threw the story in here. It's a useful reminder that Vancouver is not BC or Canada. And that has been Politos. Find links to everything we talked about at politos.ca. If you are a first-time listener, make sure to subscribe and let us know what you think. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politos. And if you have ideas for the show, feel free to send to us. Our intro music credit is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Thanks for listening.